Somebody can do it better. Somebody could do it faster. Somebody can do it cheaper. But if you have a healthy organization, that's incredibly hard to compete with. And having competed with unhealthy organizations, I knew we could win by doing that.
Hello and welcome to the first episode of the new Emerge Product Market Fit Academy series, where we're joined by leading operators and founders in edtech to share practical insights and advice for early stage founders. If you're building the future of learning and work, then this is for you. I'm Zara, and I'm joined by my co-host Mario and our guest Craig Pine. Craig is the CEO of Amerigo, the premier destination for international high school students who want to study in the US. With team members in 11 countries, they prepare students from over 30 countries to study in top universities in the US and Canada. Prior to Amerigo, Craig was president and CEO of Deltac, a pioneering provider of online education services. Deltac partnered with leading US universities to help working adults advance in their career. Deltac was bought by Wiley for over $220 million. At the time, they had 45 university partners and 300 online programs. Craig then became a managing director in Wiley's corporate development group. He's also involved with many edtech startups and is an angel investor in companies like Grown-In, a cannabis education business, Re-Up, helping institutions and learning providers enroll and support adult learners, and Sales Impact Academy, the world's leading go-to-market learning platform. He also sits on the board of Red Shelf and is the chairman of Fourth Rev, and of course is a venture partner with Emerge. Thank you so much, Craig, for joining us today. I would love to start with your background. Could you tell us a little bit more about how you first got into education and more specifically edtech?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Zara and Mario. In the late 90s, I was working in technology in Chicago. And 2000, as everybody knows, the dot-com crash happened and quickly had to reevaluate my career choice. The business I was working for here in Chicago was quite successful, integrated technology consulting firm, and within 1 year of the dot-com crash, they'd done a big acquisition, and unfortunately, the company did not survive. Through some relationship that I had here in Chicago, got involved with a very early days online learning business out of Raleigh, North Carolina called Eduprise. It was started at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and they had developed one of the very first learning management systems. And I joined there as head of business development to build an online education services business. And that really became the roots of Deltac. At that time, it was mostly for-profit education providers that were serving non-traditional learners with adult or with online education. And so we were moving into working with traditional nonprofit universities. So it was quite interesting times, to say the least, but we were there at the beginning and built it into quite a successful business over about a 10-year period.
Thanks so much, Craig, for sharing more about your background. Now I want to move us on to the meaty part of the conversation. We're going to cover 4 topics today, going from developing and retaining top performers, building a connected team culture, performance management principles, and creating alignment and cohesion among the leadership team. I'm excited to learn more about your frameworks and principles. Before we jump in, to start us off, could you just give us a bit more of an overview of the teams you've managed at Deltac, Wiley, and Amerigo?
Sure. Going back to Deltac, I was really a startup within a larger organization. We first started, and my role was business development, signing new partners, and then built a student marketing and recruitment function, as well as a student retention function, then online course design and development. Those were the primary functions that created new relationships and built programs and then brought students in to the programs. We also built a very robust and effective partnership management function, so customer service, essentially, where we had teams of people that were managing our university partnerships from a director level down to an integrated team that was serving all functions to, again, design, develop, deliver students, and produce successful outcomes for each university partner. It was program-specific focus, and that was the bulk of the organization. I had the benefit at that time of being, again, part of a larger entity, so some of the centralized services, finance, human resources, technology, were sitting at the parent company level, so it frankly allowed me to focus as an entrepreneur and really be customer-focused, both student and university customers. Most startups don't have that luxury. They have to do everything. It was a pretty scalable model. hiring talent was priority number one. So it was really finding great people and then scaling up and breaking it down into component parts. You had N number of university partners, and within those, you had X number of programs. And so looking at everything at the component level allowed us to build an effective organization. As we then transitioned it into John Wiley and Sons, which is a publicly traded 120-year-old publisher, that was quite a different experience because we were now a smaller part of a much larger, geographically diverse and much more complicated entity. Frankly, made it a little bit harder for us to really serve the student and the university at the level we wanted because there's some external factors. So the joys of having your own startup is you can really just be laser focused on the customer and the outcome. So that's Deltek Wiley. In terms of Amerigo, we started as Avedon Capital is our financial sponsor. They came up with the idea to find a better way to serve international high school students that were coming to the U.S. And they have a concept called a constructed startup. So really started with a business plan, funding, which obviously is crucial. And again, most founders are spending 30, 40, 50% of their time finding funding. So I have the luxury of not having to do that here. But we started from scratch. A few core team members came from Avedon, no students, no partners. But having done that at Deltek, had a sense of how to do that. So really built it the same way. Started with really building a healthy organization, but used a book called The Advantage, written by Patrick Lencioni, which really outlines the principles of building a healthy organization based on the concept that most products, services are replicable by others. Somebody can do it better, somebody can do it faster, somebody can do it cheaper. But if you have a healthy organization, that's incredibly hard to compete with. And having competed with unhealthy organizations, I knew we could win by doing that. So that was within 2 weeks of starting the business, we implemented the Advantage framework. But in terms of managing the team, it looked very similar. Student recruitment, school business development, finding high school partners in this case, then account management, the teams that would work with the schools, but primarily work with the students because our kids live in either a boarding residence or with a host family in and around the high school that we serve. So all those same functions existed, and this is an in-person learning business more than an online business like Deltek. So less of a technology component, but all the same principles applied.
An amazing breadth of experiences from super early stage businesses to working for huge 100-plus-year-old corporates. And I love always hearing about education. When you're running a generalist business, you're thinking things from sales, product functions, whereas in education, it's always so much more nuanced in terms of student success, recruitment teams, onboarding, a lot more details and different teams to handle across different geographies. So super excited to hear more about your learnings across those three businesses. The first topic to jump into is around team composition. What is your approach to developing and retaining top performers?
Sure. It starts obviously with hiring and the whole sourcing and screening process and knowing what you're looking for in a top performer and being incredibly thorough about understanding what are the core competencies that you need in team member, and then hiring for that and making sure you've got cultural fit as well. But once you have the team member, then the frameworks are really just performance management, making sure that the individual understands what's expected of them, and then having an open and ongoing and consistent process to manage that, making sure that there's upside mobility for team members. So if you're hiring a top performer, from day one, they're going to walk more. They're going to be in your office or on Zoom every so often asking what's next for me, making sure you actually have a growth path for those folks, and then making sure you're investing dollars and or time. And it doesn't have to be a lot of dollars, but there has to be a conscious effort to make an investment in developing high-performing team members because they're going to always be in demand. If they're high-performing, they're producing results, and for themselves, they're thinking about what's next. So you have to become valuable to that person such that if they're going to build their career, you want them to build it with you. And simply paying them for performance, that's crucial. And that's another one of the retaining and developing team members, kind of a competitive compensation plan. But that's table stakes. Everybody expects that. So the development and the investment in the development is crucial. Those are really the four things that I...
Thanks so much, Craig, for sharing that. So we talked about the hiring frameworks to set things up, hire the right talent, talk about performance management, upward mobility, and competitive compensation, of course. Let's dig in another layer of depth there. If you could just kind of take us through a few more sentences each and how you think about those.
Sure. So first, for hiring framework, it's simple, but it starts with a well-constructed job description and having alignment with your senior team on exactly what you're looking for in any given role, so that it's ultimately clear to candidates what is expected of them, and you can vet them on that basis. So many times, right, you need a head of business development, you need head of technology, but what specific things are you going to look for? You can filter the candidate pool, and then, frankly, having ways to test their capabilities. Obviously, if it's in a technology role, there are a number of ways that you can do that, but do not be taking anybody's word for it. You need to see for yourself what the skill sets are. If it's on the sales and marketing side, you need to see actual work product. You need to be able to get past the layer of somebody who's really good at interviewing. Because if they're good at interviewing, then they're going to leave you feeling good about their capability. So you need some objective data that gives you enough of a comfort level that they are, in fact, able to deliver what you're expecting of them. Having a structure in terms of committee, frankly, if you're talking about your senior leaders in particular, who's on this committee that is going to be interviewing these folks? There's tons of best practices produced out there, but you want to have a consistent set of people that are talking to these for each specific role individually, and then a process where you're comparing notes and coming to an informed, honest consensus about an individual. I think a huge mistake you can make as a founder is feeling like you've got to fit with someone and you're going to trust your gut, or you feel good about that. I'm always seeking out somebody who's going to have an opposing view, somebody who's going to try to poke holes in a candidate, either from a capability standpoint or a cultural standpoint. Because if everybody's on the same page and it's all yes, that's when I get nervous. But I want to see what I'm not seeing. And so you need that voice in the room. You need somebody who's quite good. And frankly, you want to be somewhat scripted across that team about who's asking what questions and what each person is focused on. In the early days of edtech and Amerigo, I interviewed every single person. I was part of that committee, regardless, student facing up to executive, because the culture piece was critical as well, is critical. As we've grown, I can't do that anymore, but that was to ensure that the starting team did that. But then we would chip around to the team. Here's what I want you to focus on. Here's what I want you to focus on. We had the HR team, right? The initial recruiter would do the screening and make sure we weren't wasting time with candidates that weren't qualified. But then we look across different dimensions. Then we got back together. We would be able to have a robust discussion and come out with a good level of conviction it was or was not the right person.
Love that approach, especially the point you made around having people in the room that disagree with you and challenge your views and not just trusting your gut. When it comes to performance management, if you want to drill into another layer there in terms of how you approach that once you've hired your key team.
Sure. So again, tons of available frameworks that you can pull from a variety of sources. Your board members, your advisors. I know certainly all the Emerge portfolio companies have just unparalleled access to leading entrepreneurs and advisors, and you guys, and use that, because you don't have to reinvent any of that, but you need a structured annual performance management process. We're about to go through ours now at Amerigo. So there's obviously the basics where everybody knows what they're being evaluated on. You set up your KPIs at the beginning of the year, so you know what you're being managed against in terms of what you're doing. And then all the performance management tools I've used, edtech and Amerigo, it's also how you're doing it. So you could be fabulous at what you're doing, but if you're a huge jerk and no one wants to work with you, you better be the best in the world. And sometimes maybe the company's willing to live with that, but that's how we've done it in both businesses, right? How are you doing at your KPI? That should be very much numerical or at least quantitative. So you and the team member know where they stand at any given point in time. And then there's the qualitative piece. We align it to our values, our core values, which in this case, mentor, voyager, and candor are our core values. And we align the how you're doing it to each one of those and how you're representing those values, not in an abstract way, but in a way that's specific to your role. So that's just like the annual review. So going into the year, everybody on the team knows what they're being measured against. You have that piece, but then what doesn't work is you get to the end of the year and you pull out that document and everybody does a self-review and you do your review and then you talk about it. It only works if it's ongoing. So whether we use 90-day checkpoints in one-to-ones that I do with my team, I always try to start with the people side of things before we get into the tactics and the strategies. Like, how are you doing as an individual, or things that you're trying to work on with that person? You're talking about that first, because guaranteed you will use up to 30 or 45 minutes or an hour on all the tactical and strategic things. And then if you're not talking about development areas, strengths and development areas, you then wind up with surprises. From my point of view, the absolute worst thing you can do is have a difficult performance conversation with someone who's totally surprised. And you're convinced in your head, or you and your fellow leaders are convinced, oh my gosh, they're not doing this, that, and the other. It's so obvious. And then you get this like blank look. What are you talking about? And that's your fault. It's not their fault, because you were not being clear on what issues were coming up as they were coming up. So real-time feedback is essential to get. Everybody can have development areas, and yes, you're going to have tough conversations, but it only works when you're roughly on the same page and it's known, right? You're having the tough conversation in the moment. I try to do it after a phone call of something that I spot that I know is a problem. I'll try to deal with it right then and there. Just kind of pull the Band-Aid off and then let the person think about it and come back. That's crucial. The other thing, a mentor of mine, guy that I worked for, Michael Locke, back in the Delta days, he had this system where at the time it was paper-based, where you'd have a meeting or you'd see something and it'd be Craig's file and he'd just jot something down and throw it in there. Now it's digital, of course, but then you could use that. It should be, again, real-time outgoing, but also when you're doing the annual review, you have a 12 months of things, good things, and things that need work. Because by the time you're sitting down for a review in August, stuff that happened last October, the recency effect comes in and it's hard to remember that. So for your own system, keeping the good and the difficult things so you can leave that discussion with the person feeling energized and you're on the same page.
It's a great point on the recency effect and a great approach of constant communication and real-time feedback loop. You touched earlier on this balance when it comes to performance on qualitative and quantitative, but I'm really interested on the culture side, especially when many companies are remote or hybrid. I would love to dig in further to your principles that you utilize for building a connected culture in geographically dispersed organizations.
So just to go on record, I much prefer a geographically concentrated team. At Deltac, we had almost 500 people in 3 offices and very few remote staff. And frankly, it was far easier to build a culture. It was far easier to get people energized, know where you stand with people. It's just much more difficult in a dispersed world. And I know that's how the world is. So you can wish that it was different than it was. But my first point on that, Zara, would be any opportunity you do have to have concentrations. Remember, I think that's irreplaceable. It's just so the things that you get by being together are in some cases almost impossible to recreate remotely. So that's the first principle. In terms of the reality and having a geographically dispersed team, which we certainly do. We have people in 11 countries, and even in the US, we've got people in probably 10 states. So having just a framework, right? Having a strategy around employee engagement and what you're actually going to do to engage the team is critical. We actually got pretty good at it in COVID and started doing a bunch of different online team building things, even if it's just hangouts, right? Where even if you're not having a meeting, the finance team would be all on Zoom or Teams, whatever, just working for a couple hours and just you're there, right? There's a study stream, and that's a business that does that for students who are studying an Emerge portfolio company. So same thing, right? Team members are just there working online. You might take a 5-minute break and chat, but you're seeing people. Doing in-person team connection whenever possible is crucial. Obviously, there's travel costs involved, but invariably, whenever we have team members getting together, and if you go on Amerigo Education social media, you'll see a lot of that. That is probably then one of the number one things that drives our culture and just drives kind of passion and excitement from the team when they get to actually be with their colleagues that they don't always see. I think that's crucial. And then another thing, we're better than some things than others, making sure like what the remote team members really need. So we do periodic surveys, employee engagement surveys, to understand where the team is, meaning how they're feeling. And we get pretty different results from the central team versus, in our case, the recruitment and student services teams that are in country. The recruitment and student services teams feel somewhat disconnected from our central team. And it's not just because they're not in the same room. It's a very specific feedback on what they need. Make sure you understand, because what those teams need is not what the central teams need. That they're working out of their house, they're traveling. It might be, in our case, can we do better expense reimbursement because they're having to fund all their travel and other things. And you just don't see that if you're sitting in the US. So whatever it is, having the survey tool and then acting on the feedback so you know what is going to create a higher engagement level. Those are the primary things that we do. And then we do an Ask Me Anything. Got that idea from Dan Summer, who's an Emerge venture partner. Just open it up. It's global for us. So every other month, I'll do a 1 hour Ask Me Anything. I'll start with a 3 or 4 minute update on what's going on. That's just what it sounds like. And I have to sometimes prompt people, but it always runs an hour. Everybody feels much more connected on what's going on. And then we'll do a town hall probably 3 times a year, where that's more structured with business updates from functional leaders, and just the teams are logging in. It's more one-way communication, but still part of like communication and clarity on where we're going, where we are, and where we're heading.
Love that balance of the more structured town halls to the unstructured Ask Me Anything, and that emphasis you put on understanding the different needs of different teams, and then thing on that feedback you get. I've covered engaging team and building culture, working together online and maintaining that connection. I'd love to move towards, on the leadership side, how you create alignment and cohesion amongst your leadership team, because of course, the alignment you have there trickles down to the rest of the organization. So it's super important to get that right.
So 2 things. One, Patrick Lencioni wrote The Advantage. He's written several books, 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. I think it's probably the most widely read book. But The Advantage is about building a healthy organization, because a healthy organization is the most sustainable competitive advantage you can have. That's his principle. A lot of it is about communication and clarity. Those are 2 of the core principles of The Advantage, and which produces alignment. And there's actually a meeting framework that he talks about in the book, which we've used at Amerigo since almost the first week we launched the business. And it's pretty simple, but it's something that you have to be disciplined to stick to. So we would have a 15-minute daily check-in with the leadership team, because we're spread out. And that's really just touching base, who's where. Sometimes it's not about business, it's just about what are people doing, but it's a regular touch point. Then once a week, we'll have a tactical meeting, which kind of goes through the KPIs, how we're progressing against those, as well as any other tactical activities that are critical to business performance. Then we'll do an ad hoc meeting, which is typically like 3 topics, about 25 minutes each, where we know that those are some of the most important things right now, and we're making sure that we're discussing those things. So it's not me setting an agenda. It's actually based on what everybody's doing and putting forth as important ad hoc topics. That's the agenda for the meeting. At Deltec, I did it the other way. I would set the agenda. because it was what I thought was most important right now. And we'd get off of an hour-long call, and sometimes we weren't necessarily talking about the most important thing. So this gives us that rigor. And then 3 times a year, we'll do a SMART day where we will actually set the defining objectives for the upcoming, in our case, 4-month period, because we're operating on an academic calendar. So we'll spend half a day or more discussing not only our overall KPIs, but what are the most important things we're going to do in the next period and over the next year. And then we'll do a healthy day, which is a separate day, which really is about how we're doing as a team. And that's where you get the cohesion and alignment as much as anything. We'll talk about, it depends on what's going on at the time, but things, do we have elephants in the room? And are we letting that exist? And are we talking around things instead of directly addressing things? We've done disc profiles of everybody on the leadership team, so we know the wiring of everyone. And we've used that to solve some conflicts where if you run a team of any size, eventually you're going to wind up with 2 people that are wired very differently, and it comes out in different ways, and the whole team knows there's friction. But when you actually get down to the essence of how people are wired, it produces and creates an understanding of other people on the team, and it lets those individuals figure out why maybe somebody's communicating in a certain way or reacting in a certain way, and it creates alignment because you're talking about the hard things. What we try to do, and we don't always do this as well as we should, but at the end of every tactical or ad hoc meeting, we'll talk about how are we doing as a team and making sure that is a topic of conversation, not just strategy and tactics, because those things can start breaking down if you have people in silos. One of the things he talks about is having meetings after the meeting is a flashing red light that you have problems. So if a meeting of 6 people on a team ends and then 2 people are going off and think, wow, I don't think that made any sense. What do you think about that? And you wind up having these pods in these silos. That breaks down the culture, that breaks down the alignment, and then it feeds to the rest of the team, as you said. So if the leadership team's not aligned, you can be sure the organization is not going to be on the same page.
It's a great point and framework that you shared, particularly that built-in reflection of organization health to avoid that friction building up and moving towards collective understanding. Fantastic. So I have one last follow-up question before we move into the quick-fire questions that we have. Bringing what you said closer to sort of the edtech space, there's often this tension between this grand mission and vision of how to improve education and then the more practical day-to-day nitty-gritty business metrics. Have you seen and experienced this kind of friction? And if so, how do you navigate it to strike the right balance between the two for edtech-specific teams?
It's a fabulous question. Yes, I've seen it many times in all of my businesses, and there's no easy button answer, right? With edtech, with any business, you need customers, right? So you're going to be putting a lot of emphasis on the marketing, the sales, the recruitment, whatever it happens to be. That is the fuel for the car. And without that, nothing else works. In an edtech sense, right? Especially if you're serving students of any kind, retention, that's the outcome, right? The person is starting and finishing, they're getting the outcome they want. It's very trite, but it's always much more cost effective and profitable to retain a student versus getting a new one, or retain a customer versus getting a new one. And everybody knows that. It's still, that tension is still there, right? Where are you allocating resource in the front end or student support? And can you do it profitably, right? And that gets to, like, do you have the right model? Because if you have the right model, student success should translate into financial success and sustainability, viability of the organization. If you're overly dependent on new customers, new students, you're having churn, then that tension is going to come out in multiple ways, right? It's going to come out in a financial way, and it's going to come out in a way that the team and or the students or the customers, things aren't working properly because there's not enough resource and emphasis on the actual experience you're trying to deliver, because there's so much pressure on the front end. So there's no easy answer for it. But yeah, absolutely, right? Everybody in edtech, by definition, tends to be mission driven because you can go sell software. You can go do other things in other industries. So, at least in my experience, people that are working in the industry love helping students. They love helping people grow. They love people getting to whatever that outcome might be. That's what drives them. That's the payoff. And so in an organization full of people that are wired like that, if you're not spending the right attention, you're going to have unhappy team member. And we know where that goes.
The point, there's no one size fits all solution, but if you get the model right, student success should be tied to business success. Thank you so much, Craig. And for the final part of this session, I would love to wrap up with our quick fire round. So I'm going to ask you a question and you hit me with a one-line response. You ready? What's the favorite question you ask when you hire people and why?
So tell me about somewhere in your career that you failed and what you learned from it. I want to see what the answer is. If the answer is, well, I worked too hard and they told me that I needed better work-life balance, then I know that the person's not actually being forthcoming. I want to hear about a failure because it tells me, A, somebody's learned and they're going to work for me and they're going to fail at something. And I want to know how they respond to that. And B, it tells me if they're truly being honest or if they're trying to sell me on hiring them.
If you could launch the college course that you wish you had access to when you were a student, what would it be?
Probably on sales. That's where I wound up. I studied business as a finance major, but I wound up in my career largely in a sales and business development role. And at the time, there wasn't that much education on sales. Now, Emerge as Sales Impact Academy, which I wish that existed when I was in college, because it wasn't considered important enough that academic institutions were going to teach it, but obviously it is now. So I wish SIA was around when I was in university.
What's your favorite book or reading about education?
There's a couple that I love that frankly are tied into education, but not specifically about education. So Mission Corporation is one, which is Michael Moe, GSV, who's all about education. And then as a CEO, my favorite book, it's a business book, but it applies, is The Hard Thing About Hard Things, which was written by Horowitz from Andreessen Horowitz. It's helpful, real, practical, applicable advice and learning. I love that. I go back to it often.
And finally, what's the number one piece of advice you would give to early stage edtech founders?
So you're building an organization because you want to achieve something. You're not building it for financial gain, because if you're doing that, you're going to find out that it's not really going to become sustainable. But you have to enjoy the journey. If you want to be happy, your mindset has to be enjoying the ride and enjoying the ups and downs. And you can get there, but it's going to look different. So don't lose the hours and hours that you're going to spend building and obsessing about something that was turning out differently than how you wanted. Embrace the fact that it's part of building a business, and that's in your learning when things don't work, and you're learning when things change and turn out differently than you wanted. And you'll find at the end, that's actually where you've developed the strongest relationships. That's where you get the most satisfaction of when stuff went wrong, how you dealt with it. But it's extremely hard in the moment when you see it so clearly in your mind and then all of a sudden it goes off track. It's hard to not get stuck in woe is me. It just can really take you off course versus expecting that's going to happen and then embracing that part of the journey.
Great advice. Thank you so much, Craig. It's been a real pleasure having you join us today. We really appreciate it. And you've shared some amazing advice, insights, and practical frameworks that edtech founders listening in can apply.
My pleasure. Always enjoy speaking with you guys.
Thanks for listening to the Emerge Product Market Fit Academy. If you enjoyed this episode, please like it, follow our channel, and if you're feeling generous, share it with a friend.